Ooh, what's this DOS prompt all about? I thought I'd leave this little DOSBox introduction here just so you can see exactly how to start up DOSBox. You need to mount your directory. That's pretty much it. Once you figure that out, then it's kind of just tweaking around, especially with the speed settings, which I figured out later on in this video. ElFish, you say? Well, again, I kind of left this install portion in here so I could tell you a little bit about ElFish and how I grew up with it. ElFish itself, as you can see, is a Russian company's production called Animatech, and they produced this back in '92, I believe, or '93 might be the publishing date. Anyway, one of the guys who made this here program is actually pretty famous for something called Tetris. I don't know if you've heard of that one. I believe his name is like Alexei Padjernol. I can pronounce Japanese better than I can pronounce Russian names, so bear with me on that. But anyway, this game was kind of designed to, well, it's not really even a game per se. It was just software that was kind of designed as sort of an entertaining and like enlightening, light-hearted kind of background-ish program, so that you could kind of, turn your computer into something a little bit more relaxing and less business. I suppose that was kind of the big thing back then in the days when simulation titles were booming. The Animatech group actually kind of got some help from Maxis about just some sort of help in the development process, and they actually ended up publishing the game in the States later on. And yeah, this did literally take a good 15 minutes for the install process to complete, which was kind of sad. But again, I think it was something to do more with the DOS box settings than the actual, process being unpacked and all that kind of stuff. But like I said, I kind of left this in here so I could tell you a little bit about the stuff, and so you can enjoy the awesome blue install screens that, well, a lot of early Maxis games, I keep saying Maxis games were famous for. I believe there was a lot of different just install screens that were just straight up blue color, but that's neither here nor there. This is ElFish that we're talking about, and we're going to continue on with this. Waiting for boot up. Mindscape was the original publisher, the first for the first release, and then Maxis became the second, and they also kind of released the first patch for it anyway. So we have a few different options here. We're going to start with editing tanks first, because the fish is kind of like the main core part of the program, but without the tanks, it's kind of rather pointless. So it's good to kind of check the tank creation process out first. Now you do have a pretty decent selection of options for what you can put as your tank backgrounds, the gravel type. It doesn't really let you change like much more than the color for the gravel. Unfortunately, you can't put marbles or colored stones or that kind of stuff in there. It's all the traditional gravel type stuff, but it still gives you a decent variety of options, even though they all kind of look like red. Maybe this is like the precursor to the future blue and brown scenarios that we've got going on. There's a lot of that here. You can also kind of change that frame on the outside of the tank, but not even worth messing with, really. It's negligible. Alright, so we've got sort of a base tank set up here, and then we can check out some of the other objects we've got going on as far as the tank building process goes. The next thing up are the plants. And plants are also pretty interesting in that the way they're put into the game, they have sort of a random, like, fractal type drawing process every time you want to put a plant in. It kind of randomly draws the basics of that plant determined on that square box. That's how much area space it takes up, what sort of space the plant itself can grow into or is drawn into. And each time you hit that redraw, it'll actually draw you up a new plant type, or, well, not new type, but, you know, a new look to said plant. So you kind of just tinker around with it until you get something you like. It'll randomly produce you one, and then you decide whether you want to place this thing or not. And here we have our plant. Blah, blah. And I mean, this was kind of one of the things that really got me interested in. I mean, I was already, you know, interested in aquariums, but as a kid, it was, you know, something you couldn't afford. Or, you know, you out of pocket, and you might have, you know, a small little tank or something. You know, your parents help you purchase, but this was sort of the precursor to what inevitably ended up being a lot of aquariums. And so, you know, I still have a big interest in fish and the aquatic life in general, and I really do like just sort of the design, the setup aspect of, you know, creating sort of an aquatic ecosystem. So this one little program here back in '93 kind of led to me purchasing quite a bit of aquariums. At one point, I believe I had 10 different aquarium setups going at the same time. None of them were too big. That last tank, and in fact, if you check some of the videos I've even put up, the last tank I actually had running was the big tank that I bought just towards the end of my last job. It was so big that, you know, I didn't want to set it up before I had, you know, moved out, and gotten my own place. And unfortunately, that never happened, and I ended up with, you know, a 90-gallon aquarium sitting around. And those things take up room. So we get into the actual decoration. These are kind of the static decorations in the game. These are all essentially just pictures, but I mean, they are decorative objects you can put into the tank. And that was kind of like always one of my gripes with the game itself, is that since it is like 2D, none of the objects themselves are really all that interactive. I mean, fish can go in front of or in back of them, but fish don't really interact with the object itself. They don't, you know, stop and bump into it, or, you know, swim around it. They just kind of swim, you know, in front or behind it, and that's pretty much the gist of what they do. Of course, you know, fish themselves aren't what I consider real active creatures. They swim and they swim and they swim, but at least they kind of interact with their environment a little bit better than these virtual fish do. But these virtual fish are also much cheaper. I also did show off the background music generator. Unfortunately, I don't know what happened between recordings, because I recorded this right after the Dwarf Fortress video, so I'm not sure why exactly the sound recorded there, but not here. Well, you're probably better off, because the sound generation is not what I consider the high point of this game. I mean, it's interesting in that every little instrument pack there has its own different sound, and every song is kind of a little different, but I wouldn't say any of them are worth listening to for a long amount of time. And in fact, I want to say as a kid, I eventually just kind of got entirely rid of said music altogether. But on the other hand, you could put MIDI tracks in there and replace the sound effects or the sound tracks with MIDI tracks that you might have downloaded, which were about all you downloaded back in the day as far as music was concerned. Yes, the awesome loading and saving bar. And that's actually faster than it moved back in the day, because we're talking, even with the not optimal settings in DOSBox, this is still pretty upper end, PC, 486, DX type stuff back in the day. It still had some decent processing power for, comparative to what was back then. The basic DOSBox settings. So we can get into the fish stuff, and you can kind of see one of the big, I'd like to say hindrances of the title itself back in the day. The catch area, you just kind of select an area on the map, and the generator will generate some fish types randomly. I do not think that the actual area you select has any super firm bearing on what is generated in an area, but then again, I believe that if you're talking realistically, that little lake up there would have a much narrower gene pool of fish, so it might ultimately spell much less dramatic changes in body types and color types and all that kind of stuff. Although that also can change from location to location, and a bunch of genetic type stuff that is not the goal of this video. So I figured, hey, I might as well keep one of these fish just so I can show you the other processes, especially the fun animation process. Of course, this is not the actual dope fish, but a reasonable facsimile. So. I accidentally hit continue here, which actually returns the catch menu to catching more fish, which I really didn't want to do. Whoops. But that's fine. We can move on. The evolve menu setting lets you pick any of the fish that are up there, and it essentially takes its genetic structure and kind of mutates it around a bit, and that little slider down there at the bottom right kind of lets you determine how much and what, how much of the features change and what they change into. You can, essentially, if you wanted to, let's say I wanted to keep that fish there and just change the colors of the body or the fins or whatnot, I could literally, make sure that its shape does not change at all, but the color mutation could, go from what it is now to something bizarre like that second one that just popped up there. The issue is that if you, and there's a few of these different bars you'll see in the next couple of areas, depending on if you put that bar over into the red area, which I'll show off in just a second. If you create a fish in that red area, it's considered a mutant, a mutant fish, which essentially means that it is incapable of reproducing. It's pretty much the last of its genetic line. So it cannot breed, and you cannot evolve it further. I believe the fish are marked as mutants with a little red box and an M inside of it on the, when you get to these the actual fish menu. The ones that have the little white box with the R in them are already ready to be put into tanks, and which means they're completely animated already. On the breeding screen here, it's pretty, fairly obvious. You are picking 2 of your fish and putting their, genetic makeup together and seeing what the outcome is. Again, you can variate the shape and color by as little or as great as you want, but if you put the slider into the red again, you will end up with a mutant fish, which cannot continue its genetic bloodline. So it's kind of interesting to make mutants every once in a while, but it's not something you're going to. I mean, to be honest, this title isn't something that you're really gonna mess with too much nowadays. I mean, I'm kind of just showing it off because it's a lot of it is nostalgia, but I kind of just love the idea of it. And I mean, if there's a more modern version, then that would be something I would get behind all the way. But I don't think there's a big call for, virtual aquariums of this sort. Now, this is the animation, and like I kind of hinted to earlier, this is kind of the downfall of this program. Back in the day, it literally took, well, much longer than the 15 minutes that I spent animating this guy. The fish on my, I want to say I had a 486 SX2 something or other. The fish would literally take hours to animate, to do this right here, what I'm doing now. So if you wanted to, let's say you fished up 5 or 6 different fish and you wanted to animate them, you would literally spend the entire day doing nothing but this. I mean, you'd have to, let your computer sit and do nothing but this. Even if you just wanted to animate one fish, I mean, it literally took, 4 hours on normal mode. The zoomed mode kind of makes the fish look bigger, and it also increases the animation time by probably, 50%. So it was a ridiculous amount of time. I mean, as a kid, I want to say I ended up, starting the stuff up, and starting the thing up before I went to bed, and it wouldn't be done until I came back from school the next day. But once you have fish animated and you have them in your pool of fish to be used over here on the left side of the screen, you can go back into the tank specifically and add X amount of fish to said tank. So if you wanted to just show off your one particular fish, you could put just that fish in the tank. And as you can kind of see, there was, back in the day, you really didn't have the kind of processing power to show off a lot of this stuff at the same time, so the game kind of said, hey, you're not going to put more than, 15 fish in there, are you? Because, back then, that was a lot of processing power. So, and you'll kind of see the problem pop up here without having tweaked the DOSBox settings. The processing power that I had emulated in the DOSBox wasn't quite enough to show off the 20 fish that I put in there. And in the actual software back in the day, this is essentially what occurred whenever you try to do this. The sides of the tank in themselves kind of extend off into infinity. So what it was is that the program could have the fish swim off to the side to free up those, display cycles and save you some processing power. And essentially the fish would come in and out of the sides of the screen. Well, I kind of put 20 fish in there, and none of them arrive at all. They just have decided to not show up. Well, I kind of stopped the video at some certain point here and said, you know what, I need to tweak this because this is kind of not how I remember the program at all. It only happened if you really tried to load your tank down, and even then, it would usually kind of just lag up a bit instead of not displaying the fish. So, I eventually cut in and show afterwards, after I've got the DOSBox settings fixed, a bit better processing power, there are more fish. I still believe that there is like a software cap, regardless of how much processing power I put behind said program. I think there's only going to be so many fish displayed on screen at a single time. I think there was just kind of a cap on processing power as far as the program went. So the computer, program wasn't ever designed with the thought that computers of this power would be out there nowadays, or in the near future. So just kind of showing off the various little options that you've got in the view menu there. So that's pretty much the meat and potatoes of the game. I mean, your basic goal of this is to catch and design fish. It's not really even designing, it's sort of just like evolving and mutating breeding fish to what you want in an aquarium fish, and then putting it on display. This row screen, I'm just kind of showing this off because on the disc the animated fish take like 300k. Nowadays 300k is a laughable amount of room. At 93, I believe my computer had maybe like a 60 or 80 megabyte hard drive. So these the starting fish that came with the game took up maybe 2 megabytes. Well, if you animated like an entire screen load of fish, you start to talk 6, 8 megabytes. I want to say my program got up to like 15 megabytes after I was by the time I had to actually delete it, because that was literally a sixth of my hard drive space tied up in one software program. It was kind of sad, but and then I came back into it to show off the animation process and what I consider to be the more true to processing power that we got here. But that should be enough for this. I think I'll call it good here. So until the next video, have a good one, folks.